It was a Friday evening, and the restaurant was already buzzing with soft music and the clinking of glasses. The place wasn't just any restaurant. It was the kind of place where people came not only to eat but to be seen. Expensive perfumes filled the air, and laughter from well-dressed guests echoed through the tall golden-lit room. Every table sparkled under crystal chandeliers, and a grand piano stood near the corner, its presence adding a quiet elegance to the night. Among the waitstaff moving quietly between tables was a young woman named Lena. Her uniform was plain, her steps careful. She carried plates and trays like they were delicate treasures. She always smiled softly, even when her feet ached or when customers ignored her good evening. She had worked there for almost 2 years, and most guests barely noticed her beyond a polite nod. To them, she was part of the background, someone who made their night smoother but not someone worth remembering. But behind her calm eyes and quiet voice lived something no one there knew. Before her mother got sick, Lena had studied music. She used to spend hours at the piano in her small apartment, her fingers dancing across the keys as she wrote little melodies. Back then, her dream was simple: to become a pianist and perform on a stage to make people feel something real through her music. But life didn't go as planned. When her mother fell ill, Lena left music school, sold her keyboard, and took this job. Her life became a cycle of shifts, bills, and hospital visits. Still, when she passed the grand piano every night at work, her heart ached just a little. That night, the restaurant was hosting a large group. They were famous for their connections: business owners, celebrities, and one of the country's well-known pianists who had just finished a concert nearby. The staff had been preparing for their arrival all afternoon. The manager repeated instructions in a low but serious voice. "Be extra careful, no delays, everything must be perfect." Lena listened, nodded, and quietly adjusted her apron. When the group finally walked in, the atmosphere shifted. The pianist, surrounded by admirers, wore a confident smile that showed he was used to attention. He had the kind of charm that filled the room without effort. People greeted him with admiration, and he accepted every compliment with a nod that felt almost rehearsed. Lena carried a tray of drinks to their table, moving carefully so she wouldn't spill anything on the expensive suits or shimmering dresses. "Good evening," she said softly as she placed a glass near the pianist's seat. He didn't look up. He was busy laughing with his friends, telling stories about his performance earlier that night, how the crowd wouldn't stop clapping, how the critics always praised his skill. The group around him cheered him on, clearly enjoying every word. Across the room, the live pianist who usually played at the restaurant continued his gentle tunes. His music blended into the background, light and pleasant. But the famous pianist at the table noticed. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Who's playing tonight?" he asked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "That's Daniel, sir," the manager replied politely. "He's been with us for many years." The pianist raised an eyebrow and said, Decent touch, but lacks soul." His friends laughed, and Lena's heart tightened a little. She had once played like Daniel too, trying to fill the air with emotion, not just sound. As the evening went on, the laughter at the table grew louder, the jokes sharper. The pianist ordered the most expensive wine and began tapping his fingers on the table like he couldn't sit still. Finally, he stood up and said with a grin, "Let's give them something better to listen to." Without asking permission, he walked toward the grand piano and sat down. The guests clapped, some surprised, others thrilled. He cracked his knuckles dramatically and began to play a complex piece, fast and loud, every note perfectly in place. It was impressive. His hands moved quickly, showing off his skill. People gathered closer, taking out phones, recording him as he smirked between phrases. But even with all his speed and accuracy, there was something missing. The music felt like it was there to impress, not to touch hearts. When he finished, the crowd applauded loudly. He turned toward his friends with a satisfied grin. Then his eyes caught Lena, who was standing near the counter holding an empty tray, watching quietly. He laughed lightly and said, "What do you think, miss? Not bad, right?" Lena smiled politely. "Very nice, sir." He tilted his head. "You sound unconvinced," he teased. "Come on, you think you could do better?" The people at his table laughed. The manager tried to wave it off. "Sir, she's one of our best waitresses. She's just doing her job." The pianist leaned forward, enjoying the attention. "Oh, I'm just joking," he said, though his tone carried a hint of arrogance. "But imagine that, a waitress playing for us. That would be something. The room filled with light laughter again, but Lena felt her cheeks warm. She lowered her eyes, pretending not to hear. The moment passed, and she went back to serving, though inside she felt a strange mix of embarrassment and sadness. Later, as she stood behind the counter waiting for the next order, she caught sight of the piano again. The soft reflection of its surface seemed to pull her in. She remembered her old teacher's words. Music only means something when it comes from truth. She hadn't touched a piano in nearly 3 years. She missed the feel of the keys beneath her fingers, the small mistakes that somehow made her melodies more human. The night dragged on. The rich group grew louder with every drink. Some had begun to sing along with the background music, their laughter echoing. The pianist from earlier was in full storyteller mode now, describing his world tours and how talent wasn't for everyone. His voice was light but carried a sharp edge, as if he enjoyed being above others. When Lena came to clear their table again, he looked up at her and said, "Tell me, have you ever played the piano?" She froze, unsure if she should answer. His tone wasn't cruel, just curious, but she knew it could turn into another joke. "A little," she said quietly. "A little," he repeated, amused. "Maybe you should play for us then." His friends burst out laughing again. Lena shook her head gently. "I haven't played in years." "Oh, come on," he insisted, smiling but clearly enjoying the pressure. "Don't be shy. You can't say something like that and then walk away." The manager quickly stepped in. "Sir, please, let's not make the staff uncomfortable." But the pianist only grinned wider. "No harm meant. We're all just having fun." He gestured toward the piano again. "The stage is open, waitress. Show us what you've got." The room had quieted a little now. People turned their heads, curious to see what was happening. Some looked amused, others uncomfortable. Lena's heart raced. She wanted to disappear, but another part of her, a quiet, buried part, wanted to walk forward. For a moment, she just stood there, her tray still in hand, her mind spinning between fear and longing. The world around her faded into a blur of whispers and faint laughter. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. Then she heard a faint echo of her mother's voice in her memory, gentle, warm, telling her not to be afraid of her gift. "If you have something beautiful to give," her mother once said, "don't hide it because others might not understand." Lena took a small breath and set the tray down. The pianist raised his eyebrows, surprised that she hadn't walked away. "Oh," he said with a playful grin. "Are you actually going to play?" She didn't answer. She simply walked toward the piano. The crowd fell silent, unsure what to expect. Her steps were slow, almost hesitant, but steady. The soft heels of her shoes echoed faintly on the polished floor. She stopped beside the piano, staring at the keys. For a moment, she just stood there, her reflection faintly visible on the glossy black surface. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out and brushed a finger across the keys. The sound was soft, just a single note, but it was enough to make her heart pound. The famous pianist leaned back, smirking. "Well, let's see if our waitress can keep up with the masters," he said, earning a few chuckles from his table. Lena didn't look at him. She closed her eyes, drew in a deep breath, and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The room was completely quiet now. Even the waiters paused mid-step, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The manager stood near the counter, watching nervously, unsure if he should stop her or let her play. The air in the restaurant felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath. Lena's fingers twitched once, twice, as if remembering a language she hadn't spoken in years. Then she exhaled slowly, and in that moment, without saying a word, she began to play. When Lena's fingers touched the keys, it was like time stopped. At first, she hesitated, pressing a few soft notes, uncertain, almost whispering through the piano. Her heart beat so fast she could hear it in her ears. But as the sound filled the quiet room, something inside her shifted. Her hands remembered the old patterns, the feelings, the rhythms she had buried for years. The noise of laughter and whispers faded completely. The melody started slow, gentle, and sad, like a memory being spoken out loud for the first time. It wasn't a song anyone recognized, but there was something honest in it, the kind of music that didn't ask for attention but somehow pulled everyone toward it. Her touch was light, almost fragile, yet every note carried emotion. It felt like she was telling her story without using words. The restaurant, which had been full of chatter moments ago, fell into complete silence. Waiters froze mid-step. The manager stopped worrying. Even the famous pianist who had been laughing before now leaned slightly forward, his expression changing from amusement to disbelief. Lena didn't look up. Her eyes were closed. She wasn't performing for the crowd. She was somewhere else entirely. Her mind drifted back to the tiny apartment where she used to play for her mother. She remembered those nights when her mother would sit on the couch wrapped in a blanket, listening quietly. Sometimes she would smile. Sometimes tears would roll down her cheeks. Lena had written that melody for her. It was the same piece she used to play to bring her mother peace during her illness. The keys trembled beneath her fingers as her emotions deepened. The notes grew stronger, braver. The melody swelled, carrying sadness and hope all at once. People at the tables who had been sipping their wine now sat frozen, staring. Some looked away, suddenly shy as if hearing something too personal. A few closed their eyes, drawn into her story through sound. One older woman at a nearby table felt tears fill her eyes. She whispered to her husband, "It's beautiful. It's so real." He nodded quietly, unable to speak. As Lena continued, the air in the restaurant changed. It was no longer a fancy place full of pride and noise. It became a quiet space where everyone shared the same feeling, that something special was happening right in front of them. The famous pianist's smirk slowly faded. His hand resting on the table tightened slightly as he watched. He recognized skill when he saw it, not the kind you learn from endless practice, but the kind born from pain, love, and loss. He could see it in her fingers, the way they moved with both control and surrender. He realized in that moment that the waitress he had mocked was not just talented, she was extraordinary. Lena's body moved gently with the music. Her hair brushed her shoulders as she leaned into the final part of her piece. The melody softened again, becoming delicate like a whisper fading into the wind. Then she pressed one last note, long and trembling, letting it linger in the air until it disappeared completely. Silence followed, not the awkward kind that comes after a performance, but a deep, heavy stillness where no one dared to speak. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Lena sat there with her hands still resting on the keys, afraid to move. She could feel her chest rising and falling fast, her heart still racing. Then, somewhere in the back, a single person clapped, slowly, almost cautiously. Another joined in, and then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, clapping, cheering, even whistling. The applause grew louder and louder, echoing against the walls. Lena lifted her eyes, stunned. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't even meant to impress anyone. Her face turned red as she stood up from the piano bench, her knees trembling. The famous pianist was still sitting at his table, frozen for a moment. Then slowly he stood up too and began to clap, not the loudest but the most sincere. The same man who had mocked her now looked at her with respect. As the applause went on, the manager wiped his eyes secretly. He had known Lena as the quiet, hard-working waitress who never caused trouble, never complained, and always did her job. He had no idea she carried such a gift inside her. When the sound finally faded, Lena bowed her head slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost shaking. People from the tables began calling out compliments. "That was beautiful. Where did you learn to play like that?" "Play another one." Lena smiled shyly and shook her head. "No, thank you. I should get back to work." She tried to walk away, but several people stood up to stop her. The manager hurried forward. "Lena, wait," he said, smiling proudly. "You don't have to serve right now." That was incredible. The famous pianist walked toward her, his face serious. The crowd stepped aside as he approached. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he said quietly, "That was one of the most honest performances I've heard in years." Lena didn't know what to say. She just smiled awkwardly, still holding her hands together as if unsure where to put them. He nodded slowly, as though he were trying to understand how he had missed such a thing. "You played with more heart than I did tonight," he said, almost to himself. His friends, who had been laughing earlier, now stood silently behind him. None of them dared to make a joke this time. The manager invited Lena to take a short break in the back room, but she shook her head. "I'm okay," she said quietly. She returned to her station, though her hands were still trembling. People kept turning their heads to look at her, whispering in admiration. Some even asked the manager for her full name, saying they wanted to know more about her. When she went back to clear the pianist's table, He looked at her again and said softly, "You should be on a stage, not serving food." She smiled gently. "Maybe someday," she replied. He hesitated for a second, then said, "What was the piece you played?" She thought for a moment. "It's something I wrote a long time ago," she said. "For someone I lost," he nodded respectfully. "It shows," he said quietly. "It really shows." The rest of the night passed like a dream. Guests who had seen her play couldn't stop talking about it. Some even recorded the moment and were already showing it to others at their tables. The atmosphere of the restaurant had changed completely. It was softer, warmer, and somehow humbler. When the shift finally ended and the lights dimmed, Lena stayed behind for a few minutes. The restaurant was empty now except for the sound of cleaning staff finishing up. She walked over to the piano again, running her fingers along the smooth surface. She smiled to herself, feeling both nervous and peaceful at once. She had forgotten what it felt like to play, really play, in front of people. She hadn't realized how much she missed it until tonight. The manager came up behind her and said quietly, "You know, I've seen a lot of nights here, but I've never seen a crowd like that go so silent." "You did something special tonight," Lena laughed softly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Maybe," he said with a kind smile. "But you also reminded everyone what real music feels like." When she left the restaurant that night, the air outside was cool and still. The streets were mostly empty. She pulled her jacket tight around her and started walking home. The sound of the piano still echoed in her mind. She couldn't stop replaying it. The moment she sat down, the faces in the crowd, the applause. It all felt unreal. Halfway home, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a coworker. "Someone posted your performance online. It's already getting views." Lena stopped walking. Her heart skipped. She opened the link and there it was. A short video of her sitting at the piano, her face calm, her hands moving gracefully. The caption read, "Waitress stuns everyone with her piano performance." She scrolled through the comments. People were amazed. Some said it made them cry. Others asked who she was. Someone had written, "This is what real talent looks like." She stood under the streetlight for a long moment, just staring at the screen, unable to believe what she was seeing. The same girl who had been invisible in that restaurant for years was suddenly being seen by thousands. She smiled, a small private smile. It wasn't about fame. It was about finally being heard. And deep down, she knew that this night was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of Lena's small apartment. The alarm on her phone buzzed quietly beside her, but she was already awake. She had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the night before, the music, the silence, the applause, the faces of the people watching her. It felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. Her small living room looked the same as always. A few books stacked on a wooden table, an old photo of her mother on the shelf, and a single chair by the window. But today something inside her felt different. She didn't feel invisible anymore. Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up and saw dozens of messages from coworkers and friends. Most of them were short and full of excitement. "You're all over social media. That video from last night already has thousands of views. You're famous now." Lena blinked, confused. She opened one of the links. There it was again, the video of her playing at the restaurant. Someone had filmed the entire performance and posted it online. The video had spread faster than she could imagine. People had shared it with captions like, "The waitress who played from the heart and real talent doesn't need fame." She scrolled through the comments. "This made me cry. So much emotion in every note. Who is she? Someone please find her." Lena covered her mouth, overwhelmed. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years she had felt like her music didn't matter anymore, that no one would ever hear it again. And now strangers from around the world were listening. Her phone rang suddenly. It was her manager from the restaurant. "Lena," he said, his voice almost shouting with excitement. "Do you know what's happening right now? Reporters are calling the restaurant. People want to know who you are. I saw the video," she said softly, still in disbelief. "Well, congratulations," he continued, sounding proud. "You've made our restaurant famous overnight, and everyone here is so happy for you. The owner even said you can take a few days off if you need them. You deserve it." Lena smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said, "but I'll come to work. I don't want to make a big deal out of it." After she hung up, she sat quietly for a moment staring at the piano in her memory, the same one she had touched the night before. Her mother's picture seemed to watch her from the shelf, and she whispered softly, "You'd be smiling right now, wouldn't you?" By the time she arrived at the restaurant later that afternoon, things felt very different. People she had worked with for months were suddenly treating her like someone special. "You're amazing, Lena," one of the waiters said. "I didn't even know you could play like that." She smiled politely, feeling shy. "Thank you. I didn't plan any of it." The manager walked over, his eyes full of pride. "You've got journalists waiting outside. They're asking if they can talk to you. I told them you'd think about it." She hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to be on camera." He nodded understandingly. "I get it. But maybe you should. This might be your chance to tell your story." Just then the door opened and the famous pianist from the previous night walked in. The same man who had once teased her now looked completely different. Calm, humble, and curious. He spotted Lena and walked straight toward her. "May I have a moment?" he asked politely. She nodded, unsure what to expect. He smiled gently. "I owe you an apology. Last night I behaved arrogantly. I thought I understood music better than anyone in the room. But when you played..." He paused, searching for the right words. "You reminded me what real music is. You didn't play for applause. You played from your heart. I haven't seen that kind of honesty in a long time." Lena was taken aback. "You don't have to apologize," she said softly. "You gave me the push I needed to play again." He chuckled quietly. "Well, I'm glad something good came out of my mistake." He glanced around before continuing. "Listen, I have a proposal. I'm performing again next weekend. I'd like you to join me on stage. Just one piece." "No pressure," Lena's eyes widened. "Me? On stage?" "Yes," he said simply. "The audience should hear you. They'll feel what I felt last night." She didn't know what to say. Fear and excitement twisted together inside her. The idea of playing in front of a real audience again both thrilled and terrified her. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Of course," he replied with a warm smile. "Take your time. But remember, you already moved a whole room to silence once. You can do it again." After he left, Lena sat quietly in the staff room, her hands folded on her lap. The thought of stepping onto a stage made her stomach flutter. But at the same time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night after her shift, she went home and sat by her small second-hand keyboard. It wasn't nearly as grand as the piano in the restaurant, but it was enough. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and began to play. The sound was uneven at first, her hands rusty from years of absence. But soon the music flowed again, soft and pure. Hours passed without her noticing. The room grew dark, but she didn't turn on the light. She just kept playing, losing herself in the notes. By the time she stopped, tears were rolling down her cheeks. The next few days went by quickly. The online video kept spreading. More people recognized her at the restaurant. Some customers came just to see the waitress who played the piano. A few brought flowers or small gifts, thanking her for the beautiful music. Despite all the attention, Lena stayed humble. She continued to serve tables, smile at guests, and help her co-workers just like before. But inside, she was preparing. Every night after work, she practiced quietly in her apartment, fingers moving faster, heart growing steadier. On the 5th day, she received another message from the pianist. "Rehearsal tomorrow. Still on?" She stared at the screen for a long time. Her hands were trembling again, just like that night at the restaurant. Finally, she replied, "Yes." The next morning, she went to the theater where he usually performed. It was empty except for him and a few technicians setting up equipment. When he saw her walk in, he smiled. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," she admitted. He laughed softly. "That's normal. Everyone's scared before their first big moment." They spent the next hour playing together. He asked her to perform the same piece she played at the restaurant, and when she did, he sat in silence again, just listening. When she finished, he said quietly, "It's even more beautiful in person." They practiced a duet afterward, a gentle blend of his classical strength and her emotional depth. It felt natural, effortless, like two stories joining into one song. When they finished, he looked at her and said, "You're ready." That night, back at her apartment, Lena lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about her mother again, about all the sacrifices and quiet nights they shared. "If you were here," she whispered. You'd tell me not to be afraid. She smiled softly, wiping away a tear. The next day would change everything. When the evening finally came, the concert hall glowed with golden lights. People filled the seats dressed in elegant clothes, expecting another flawless performance from the famous pianist. None of them knew that a waitress was about to share the stage with him. Backstage, Lena stood quietly, hands clasped tightly together. She wore a simple dress the color of ivory. Nothing fancy, but it suited her. The pianist walked up to her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Just remember, he said gently, it's not about them. It's about the music. Play it for yourself. She nodded, taking a deep breath. When they stepped onto the stage, the applause was immediate. The lights were bright, the crowd endless. Lena could feel every heartbeat in her chest. The pianist introduced her briefly, saying only, "Tonight I share this stage with someone who reminded me why I fell in love with music." The audience turned to look at her with curiosity. She sat at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly. The pianist gave her a small nod, and together they began to play. The melody rose softly, then grew into something powerful and full of feeling. Their music blended perfectly, his precision and her emotion, his confidence and her sincerity. By the time they reached the final note, the entire hall was silent again, just like that night in the restaurant. Then came the applause. It started softly, then grew until the entire room was standing. Lena looked up, her eyes wide, her face glowing under the lights. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just a waitress serving tables in the corner of a busy restaurant. She was a musician again, and the world was finally listening. The sound of applause still echoed in Lena's ears long after the concert ended. She stood beside the piano, her hands trembling slightly, her heart still racing. The stage lights were bright, but the warmth she felt inside outshone everything around her. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding behind a tray or standing quietly in the background. She was standing where her heart had always belonged. The pianist beside her smiled proudly. He leaned in and whispered, "See? I told you they'd love you." Lena couldn't stop smiling. The audience stood clapping, some even wiping away tears. The feeling was almost unreal, overwhelming but beautiful. When the curtain finally came down, she turned to him and said softly, "Thank you for believing in me." He shook his head. "You don't need anyone's belief, Lena. You already had everything you needed, you just had to remember it." Backstage, several organizers and journalists waited, eager to meet her. They congratulated her, asked for photos, and praised her performance. She answered politely, still a little dazed. It felt like she was moving through a dream. Cameras flashed, microphones appeared, and questions came all at once. "How long have you been playing? Is it true you're a waitress? What inspired that piece?" She laughed nervously. "Yes, I'm still working as a waitress. Music was always a part of my life, but I stopped for a while. I just played what I felt." One reporter said, "Your story is inspiring. You showed everyone that talent can come from anywhere." Lena smiled humbly. "Thank you. I just played from my heart." That night, as she walked home under the quiet city lights, she carried her shoes in her hand, her feet tired but her spirit light. The streets were almost empty, and the cool air brushed against her face. Everything felt softer, brighter, as if life had given her back something she thought she'd lost forever. When she reached her small apartment, she sat by the window and looked out at the city. Cars moved like tiny dots of light below. Her old keyboard sat in the corner, waiting silently. She smiled and whispered, "We did it, Mom." Tears filled her eyes as she remembered her mother's face, her warm voice saying, "One day your music will touch people's hearts." At that moment, Lena finally believed it. The next morning, she woke up to dozens of notifications again. The video of the concert was everywhere. People shared it with captions like, "From waitress to star," and "the performance that moved everyone to tears." News channels played clips of her music, and even local radio stations mentioned her name. Her inbox was flooded with messages, from fans, musicians, even record labels. Some invited her to perform. Others simply wanted to tell her how her story gave them hope. She couldn't believe it. Just a few weeks ago, she was invisible, just another face in the crowd. Now the world seemed to know her name. But despite all the attention, Lena stayed grounded. She still went to work at the restaurant. She told her manager she didn't want to quit yet. This place gave me my moment, she said softly. It's part of my story. Customers who recognized her often stopped to say hello. Some asked for photos. Others just wanted to shake her hand. Every night someone would mention her piano performance, and every time she would smile shyly, not used to the praise. The restaurant's owner was proud too. You've brought life into this place, he told her one evening. People come here now not just for food, but for inspiration. Lena laughed gently. I'm glad. I just want people to feel something real. But fame wasn't without challenges. Soon, reporters began waiting outside the restaurant. They wanted interviews, pictures, and quotes. Some tried to dig into her past, asking about her family, her struggles, even her personal life. It was all too much. One night, after a long shift, she sat in the back room, her hands covering her face. The sudden attention was exhausting. She had always lived quietly, and now the whole world seemed to be watching her every move. The pianist called her that night. How are you holding up? He asked gently. I don't know, she admitted. It's strange. Everyone wants something, a story, a headline, a show. I just wanted to play music, he paused before saying, then keep doing exactly that. Don't let the noise change why you started. His words gave her peace. She realized he was right. She didn't owe the world anything but her honesty. So she started focusing on her music again. Between shifts, she spent hours at her keyboard, writing new melodies. Some were soft and hopeful. Others carried the quiet ache of memories. She didn't know if she'd ever record them, but she wanted to play again. Not for fame, but for herself. A week later, she received a letter from a small music school in another city. It wasn't from a big company or a talent show, but from a group of teachers who had seen her story online. They wrote, "We were moved by your performance. We'd love to offer you a place in our program if you'd like to continue your studies." Lena read the letter twice, her heart swelling with emotion. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was a chance to grow, to learn again, to live the dream she had given up years ago. She thought about it for a long time. The idea of leaving her job, her familiar life, scared her. But deep down she knew this opportunity wouldn't come again. The next day she met with her manager. I need to tell you something, she began nervously. I've been offered a place at a music school. I think I need to take it. The manager smiled warmly, though his eyes looked a little sad. I knew this day would come, he said. You belong behind a piano, not behind a counter. I'll miss this place, she said softly. He nodded. We'll miss you too, but this is your moment. Don't look back. Her co-workers threw her a small farewell dinner on her last day. They laughed, shared stories, and teased her about becoming famous. Don't forget us when you're on TV again, one of them joked. Lena smiled. I'll never forget where it all started. When she walked out of the restaurant that night, the streets were quiet, just like the first night she had played the piano there. She stopped by the window and looked inside. The same piano stood in the corner, shining softly under the lights. For a moment, she saw her reflection on its surface, the same girl, but not the same person. She took a deep breath and whispered, Thank you. Months passed, and life at the music school became her new world. It wasn't easy. She had to adjust to schedules, theory lessons, and long hours of practice. But she loved every second of it. She met other musicians who shared her passion, and slowly, she started performing again. This time not as a waitress who surprised a crowd, but as a musician finding her place in the world. Her teacher once told her, You play like someone who has lived 1,000 lives. Lena smiled. Maybe I just play like someone who finally stopped hiding. She began to write her own pieces again, inspired by everything she'd been through, her struggles, her mother, the nights at the restaurant, and that unforgettable moment when she played from her heart and the world listened. Sometimes, during quiet evenings, she would watch that old video again, the waitress in the plain uniform, trembling as she touched the piano keys, now felt like a stranger. Yet she was also the reason everything changed, and every time she watched it, she whispered the same words under her breath. Never be afraid to start again. Weeks turned into months, and Lena's new life began to bloom in ways she had never imagined. The music school became her second home. Every morning she would walk through the gates with her notebook and headphones, feeling both nervous and grateful. The walls of the school were filled with sound, violins from one room, a choir from another, and pianos echoing softly through the halls. It was a place where music never stopped breathing, and she felt like she finally belonged. Her teachers admired her dedication. Even though she had less formal training than most students, she made up for it with passion. While others played by the book, Lena played by heart. She practiced for hours, often long after everyone else had left. Sometimes, when the lights were dim and the hallways were quiet, she would sit alone at the piano and play the same melody that once silenced the rich crowd in the restaurant. But despite her growing success, she never forgot where she came from. She still kept in touch with her old manager and coworkers. They would send her pictures of the restaurant and small messages like, "We still play your video for new staff." Each message reminded her how far she had come and how many people believed in her now. One day, during a break between classes, she received a call from the pianist who had once challenged her, the same man who had handed her the stage that changed her life. She hadn't heard from him in a while, though he had kept his promise to help her when she needed guidance. His voice over the phone was cheerful. "Lena," he said, "how would you feel about performing with me again?" Her eyes widened. "Perform? With you?" "Yes," he said with a light laugh. "It's a charity concert. I thought of you the moment they asked me to invite another pianist. It's not about fame, it's about music, and you know that better than anyone." Lena hesitated for a moment. Performing with him again meant stepping back into the spotlight, facing a large audience once more. She had grown comfortable at the school, away from flashing cameras and curious reporters. But deep down she knew that opportunities like this didn't come often. "I'd be honored," she said finally. He smiled through the phone. "Good, I'll send you the details. And Lena, this time you won't just be my guest. You'll be my equal on stage." The following weeks were filled with preparation. Lena practiced every day, balancing her lessons with rehearsals for the concert. The pianist visited the school a few times, and together they spent hours perfecting their duet. He was amazed by how much she had grown. "You've changed," he said one evening as they played side by side. "You're more confident now," she smiled softly. "Maybe because I finally believe I belong here." The concert was to be held in a grand theater in the city, the same one where he had played many of his biggest shows. Posters went up, and soon the event gained attention online. Some people still remembered Lena's viral video, calling her the waitress who stole the spotlight. Others were curious to see how far she had come since then. When the night of the concert arrived, the theater was filled with people from all walks of life. Musicians, students, business people, and even some of the regular customers from the restaurant. The air buzzed with anticipation. Backstage, Lena paced nervously. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Simple black dress, no jewelry, hair tied neatly. She didn't look like a celebrity. She looked like herself. And that's exactly how she wanted it. The pianist walked in, smiling warmly. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, trying to calm her racing heart. When they walked out onto the stage, the applause was loud and warm. The lights were bright, but she could still make out faces in the crowd, familiar ones from the restaurant, some old friends, and even her music teachers, sitting proudly in the front row. The concert began with his solo. His fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, filling the hall with a rich, vibrant sound. The audience listened in awe, but Lena wasn't nervous anymore. She watched from the side of the stage, feeling calm. Then it was her turn. She walked toward the piano slowly, the same way she had done months ago in that restaurant. The crowd grew quiet, and for a moment the memory of that night flashed in her mind. The laughter, the challenge, the fear, and then the silence. But this time there was no mockery, no doubt, only respect. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody she chose wasn't a showpiece or a flashy performance. It was something she had written herself, a piece inspired by her journey from the quiet restaurant nights to this grand stage. Every note carried a story. The soft beginning spoke of struggle, the rising chords told of courage, and the final part bloomed into something pure and hopeful. As she played, the pianist joined her. Their hands moved in perfect harmony, their sounds weaving together like two voices telling the same truth. The music rose and fell like waves, gentle but powerful, until the final note faded into silence. And just like that first night, the audience didn't clap immediately. They sat there still, as if afraid to break the spell. Then one by one, people began to stand. The hall filled with applause that felt endless. Lena stood up slowly, her eyes shining with tears she didn't bother to hide. The pianist took her hand and raised it proudly. "Everyone," he said into the microphone, "this is the real talent I told you about. The one who reminded me what music is truly about." The crowd cheered louder, some even shouting her name. Backstage after the performance, people congratulated her again, but this time she felt different. It wasn't shock or disbelief, it was quiet gratitude. She didn't feel like an outsider anymore. She felt like she had come home. Later that night, as she walked out of the theater, she saw a small group of children waiting near the door. They looked nervous, holding little notebooks. One of them stepped forward and said shyly, "Miss Lena, we watched your video. You made us want to learn piano too." She knelt down and smiled warmly. "That makes me happier than you can imagine. Promise me something, always play from your heart." Not for applause. The children nodded eagerly, and she signed their notebooks with a simple message: "Believe in your own melody." As she walked home, she thought about how far she had come, from cleaning tables and carrying trays to performing for hundreds of people who believed in her. But what made her happiest wasn't the fame or the applause. It was knowing that her story might help someone else find the courage to chase their dream, no matter where they came from. That night, when she reached her apartment, she sat down at her old keyboard again. It was scratched and worn, but still beautiful in its own way. She placed her fingers on the keys and played softly, smiling to herself. The world outside didn't know what song she was playing, and it didn't matter. It was hers. A quiet tune of peace and gratitude, and somewhere deep inside she could almost hear her mother's voice again, whispering, "See? I told you your music would touch hearts." Lena closed her eyes and whispered back, "It finally did, Mom." The night breeze flowed through the open window, carrying the sound of her piano into the distance, gentle, honest, and full of life. It wasn't just music anymore. It was the sound of someone who had found her place in the world. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, filling the small apartment with soft golden light. Lena slowly opened her eyes, the sound of birds outside blending with the gentle hum of the city. Her old keyboard still sat near the window, the same one that had started it all. It looked a little worn out now, but it still held the same quiet beauty. It had been almost a year since that charity concert with the famous pianist. So much had changed since then. She had continued her studies at the music school, finished her program, and started teaching part-time. Her days were now filled with music, not the kind that needed to impress anyone, but the kind that helped others discover their own voice. She often thought about how strange life could be. Just a short while ago, she was invisible, serving food, cleaning tables, quietly humming melodies that no one heard. And now she was guiding young students who looked up to her as a teacher. Every afternoon, she taught children at a small community center near her home. Some were shy, others were full of energy, but all of them came with the same dream: to play, to create, to feel something through music. Lena loved seeing their eyes light up when they played their first song correctly. She often told them, "Don't worry about mistakes. Music isn't about perfection. It's about honesty." One day, while she was finishing her last class, a woman entered the room. She wore a neat coat and carried a letter in her hand. "Are you Lena?" she asked kindly. "Yes," Lena replied. The woman smiled. "I'm from a foundation that organizes international music events. We've been following your story for a while. We're planning a concert in Vienna, a program celebrating musicians who started from humble beginnings. We would love for you to perform." Lena blinked in surprise. "Vienna? The same Vienna where Mozart and Beethoven lived?" The woman nodded. "Exactly. It's a great honor, and we think your story and music deserve that stage." For a moment, Lena couldn't speak. It felt unreal. She had dreamed of visiting Vienna ever since she was a little girl, sitting next to her mother, watching old performances on television. She accepted the invitation with a grateful smile. "Thank you. I'll do my best." When she hung the letter on her wall that night, she couldn't stop staring at it. Her dream was taking her farther than she had ever imagined. Weeks passed and preparations for the trip began. The foundation arranged her travel and accommodations, but Lena wanted to bring something special with her, a piece of her own story. She decided to compose a new song, one that reflected her entire journey. She spent nights working on it, sitting at her old keyboard, surrounded by notes and sheets of paper. The melody began softly, almost shy like a whisper from the past. Then it grew stronger, more confident, carrying the rhythm of her struggles, her courage, and the peace she had found along the way. She named it Echoes of the Heart. When the day of her departure arrived, she packed a small suitcase along with her notebook of songs and a photo of her mother. She kissed the frame gently and whispered, "I'm taking you with me." The flight to Vienna was long, but she spent most of it looking out the window, lost in thought. The clouds below looked like soft waves, and she couldn't help but think about how far life had brought her. When she arrived, the city was breathtaking, cobblestone streets, old buildings with golden lights, and the faint sound of street musicians playing violins. Everywhere she turned there was music. It felt like the city itself was alive. The concert hall where she was to perform was grand and historic. The piano on stage shone under the lights, its surface smooth and flawless. She stood before it, running her fingers lightly across the keys. For a moment she thought of that restaurant piano, slightly out of tune but full of memories. Rehearsals began and she practiced every day. Musicians from all over the world were there, each with their own stories of hardship and hope. She listened to them, feeling connected by something deeper than language. They all understood what it meant to dream against the odds. On the night of the performance, the hall was packed. The audience included famous composers, critics, and students. The lights dimmed and soft murmurs faded into silence. Lena took a deep breath backstage, clutching the small pendant her mother had once given her. When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage. The applause was polite but curious. Many people had heard her story but had never seen her perform in person. She bowed slightly, then sat down at the piano. For a brief moment, she closed her eyes. She could almost hear her mother's voice again, calm and reassuring. "Play from your heart, my dear. That's where the truth lives." Then she began. The hall filled with the first notes of Echoes of the Heart. It started quietly, almost like a whisper between old friends. Slowly the melody unfolded, carrying every emotion she had ever felt. Loneliness, fear, hope, love. Each chord seemed to speak to someone in the room. Some listeners leaned forward. Others sat still, eyes glistening. Halfway through the piece, the sound grew bolder. It was as if the music was rising against the noise of doubt and fear. And when the final part came, the tune softened again. Peaceful, gentle, like a sigh of relief after a long journey. When the last note faded, the hall remained completely silent. It was the same kind of silence that had once filled the restaurant all those months ago. Then slowly the applause began. Soft at first, then rising until it filled the entire room. People stood on their feet, clapping and cheering. Lena bowed deeply, tears shining in her eyes. She didn't see the audience anymore. She saw her mother's face, smiling proudly in her heart. After the concert, several people came to congratulate her. A well-known composer shook her hand and said, "Your music speaks without words. That's something very few people can do." Another musician added, "You reminded us why we fell in love with music in the first place." Lena thanked them humbly. She didn't see herself as a star, just someone who had finally found her voice. That night, as she walked through the quiet streets of Vienna, snowflakes began to fall softly. She pulled her coat tighter and smiled. Every step echoed faintly against the old stone path, blending with the distant sound of someone playing the violin nearby. She sat on a bench near a small square, watching the city lights shimmer. For a while, she simply listened, to the wind, the music, and her own steady heartbeat. It all felt like one big symphony, written by life itself. She whispered softly, "Thank you." When she returned home a week later, she was welcomed warmly by her students. They crowded around her, asking questions about Vienna and the big concert. She told them about the people she met, the music she heard, and how beautiful it all was. But then she smiled and said, "You know what I realized? The biggest stage in the world isn't always made of lights and applause. Sometimes it's right here, when you help someone else discover their own music." The children clapped, and one of them asked shyly, "Can you play us the song you played there?" Lena nodded. She sat down at the small piano in the corner and began to play Echoes of the Heart. The children listened quietly, their faces glowing with wonder. When she finished, one little girl said softly, "It sounds like a story." Lena smiled warmly. It is, she said. It's all of our stories, about never giving up. As the children left that day, she stayed behind for a while looking at the piano keys. The sunlight from the window touched them gently, just like it had that first morning long ago. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "No matter how far I go, this is where it began." Then she began to play again, not for the world, not for fame, but for herself, for her mother, and for every soul who ever dreamed quietly in the shadows, waiting for their moment to shine. And once again, somewhere between the notes there was silence, that beautiful, peaceful silence that meant she had reached someone's heart.